Musical chairs. Good evening, and welcome to this, the 16th edition of the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. It's absolutely my pleasure to be your moderator for this evening's session. And as the darkness has drawn in outside, and as the evening draws in, we're in for quite a special event.
Don't bet on it.
Paul Lynch is the author of 5 novels over the past decade. Many of which, if not all of them, have been either long-listed, short-listed, or won awards. He's a prior film critic, as I'm sure many of you will know, having written for both the Irish Sunday Tribune and the UK Sunday Times. We're here today to talk about his life and his influences, and most specifically, this quite phenomenal book, Prophet Song. Prophet Song portrays a family and a time set in the future where society really is on the brink of collapse. And the main character of this book, which Paul will talk to us about, it's her efforts to try and avoid this family deteriorating along with society around her. And aside from all those awards that he was shortlisted for and longlisted for and won in the past over many countries, as you well know, he's the proud recipient of the 2023 Booker Prize, which we need to give him a big round of applause to get out of the way. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Welcome to Dubai.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I was going to start talking about the premise of the book and setting up, and we have you here to hopefully help me do that.
Eilish Stack. Yeah, who is Eilish Stack? Prophet Song is a book that begins on a dark, wet night in Dublin, as most nights are in Dublin, and there's a knock on the door, and Eilish Stack is a mother of 4. She's a scientist. She works for a pharmaceutical career. Her husband, Larry, works for the Teachers Union of Ireland as a trade unionist. And it's the Dublin that we think we all know. But the knock on the door is coming from the GNSB, the Garda National Services Bureau, who are Ireland's newly formed secret police. And we don't have secret police in Ireland. Or if we do, and so they want to speak with Larry. And what's happened is Ireland has elected a populist government.
And Larry's Eilish's husband.
He's Eilish's husband. Eilish, I call her Eilish, some people call her Eilish. It's a where are you from in Ireland thing. But anyways, and what's happening is that there is a turn towards tyranny. Democratic norms are just beginning to slide. And the temperature has been turned up so slowly that nobody has truly noticed yet what's going on. And so the media is starting to be curbed. And now the pressure is just being applied to the Teachers Union of Ireland. And Larry is taken in for questioning. And the question that's put to him is quite an extraordinary one, which is that, can you prove to us that your behavior as a trade unionist is not seditious towards the state? And if you've been living in a liberal democracy for 45 years, as Larry would have been doing, that's counterintuitive. And so that's the background. And the book is essentially an unraveling of everything that we hold dear, everything that we take for granted, everything that we know. And it's the known world becoming the unknown world. And it's Eilish Stack, almost like a Greek heroine, doing her damnedest to outmaneuver these forces that are just ranging so far, so wide, so incomprehensible, so blindly around her, trying to do the things necessary to save her family, because at various points, the family starts to disappear.
So we get this sense, and there are these clouds really on the horizon at the beginning, and they are these dark clouds that are really just starting to appear, and yet there's normalcy that continues.
Yeah.
Contrasted with these moments of accelerated tension that start to compound her life as she tries to go about remaining normal, So we have to be very careful about spoilers here. Who's actually read the book? Let's just have a quick show of hands. Right, the rest of you leave so we can have some spoilers. No, so right, lots of people haven't read the book, so we'll talk to you about buying the book and getting it.
You're all going to read it now, right?
Yeah, you're all going to read it now.
Okay, good.
But I would say it starts. I mean, you often have books maybe or novels that start and they have highs and lows.
Larry is disappeared. Okay.
Yeah.
There we are.
At the beginning. So I think we have to say that.
He's disappeared.
So the husband disappears at the beginning. And there are novels that, take you on a roller coaster in certain directions. You have to read this book. And if you read it without crying, I would be really, really, come and find me. I'd be surprised if you don't cry. Because the book kind of starts, and the roller coaster tries to take her up. But really, the book just takes you to a place and just continues to take you to a place that is very dark.
Yeah. And that darkness is important because denial is a fundamental sort of theme in this book. Eilish says to herself over and over again, this will not be allowed to happen. This is not the kind of thing that happens here. But it is happening. And the tipping point at which it really becomes too late is invisible. It's just suddenly become too late. The damn thing has its own momentum. And yet at the same time, because you were talking about the sort of the banality of her life, a huge aspect of this book and the way that I conceived of it was that I wanted to write the inside out of the Iliad, if that makes sense. As an example, if you take a book like the Iliad, it foregrounds the heroics, it foregrounds the politics, the heroes, the action. And it pays no attention to the ordinary people in the background. So what happens if you take the Iliad and you turn it inside out? You get Eilish Stack. So the book foregrounds the events from the point of view of Eilish, from the banality of her life as she goes into supermarkets and goes to work and drops her kids to school. And what's happening is happening in the background, unseen. And so that sense of reality is what brings the reader into the feeling of Eilish, the sort of the heartbeat of every moment. And also the key thing for me is the hidden cost of personal events, the things that we don't see, the things that don't get written about, to really get inside those little moments. And those moments are the now. They're part of just the unfolding, quiet reality of her day.
And when we say that this can't be happening, what this is, we're talking about a state taking over rights. We're talking about totalitarianism coming. We're talking about the normalization of things that shouldn't be happening in a near island of the future.
Yeah. There's an interesting sort of moment of awareness that I had before I was writing this book, where I understood how much had actually changed in our own time. Because it's very difficult for us to truly ascertain what has changed. You think back and you're like, I reread Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. And it was a book that I'd read in my early 20s, in the late 90s. In the late 90s, think about it, it was just so sedate. Fukuyama said that the history had come to an end, and many of us thought that we kind of believed him. Progress was at its peak, and this was the sort of the utopia. And so I read a scene in Hesse Steppenwolf where the book was written in 1927, and Harry Haller, who's the anti-hero of the book, is looking out at Germany at that point in time. And he's seeing the fragmentation of the politics, the complete disarray, the anti-Semitism, the xenophobia, and how it was sort of playing openly on the streets. And he said the destruction is inevitable. The next war is going to come. And Hesse was completely correct. But I remember when I read that in my 20s, and I thought, gosh, because you have that touch of nihilism in your 20s. You're like, must have been incredible to live through that kind of time. I wish my life was more exciting than this boring, banal 1990s, late 90s. And it was so banal, I can't even remember who was in power in Ireland at that time. I mean, that tells you everything. And I reread the book in 2018, and I read that page, and I felt this chill of recognition. I thought, my God, this is happening now. I'm seeing this now, and I'm seeing it everywhere.
And you're from Ireland, and you
Yeah.
set it in Ireland.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be set in Ireland.
No.
It could have been set in any place. And we've seen these images of refugees. We've seen these images of people having to flee their states. We've seen these images from 40,000 feet, or it's remote, and it maybe doesn't resonate with certain audience. Why was it important to set it in Ireland?
It's funny, when the decision itself was made intuitively. I didn't rationalize this. And so much of what we do as writers is we arrive at something intuitively. We arrive at something, I call it out of the blind. It just comes from your subconscious and you suddenly have something. And very often you don't know quite what it is. I wrote that first page without knowing a single thing about what I was doing. And I had been interested in world events, but I'm not a political writer, and I think it's very important to, and I'll talk about that later if that's interesting, but I'm just interested in taking these images that come into my head and unpacking them and examining them and see where it leads me. And there was Eilish not answering the door, and so I just kept going. And later I realized that there is a kind of beauty to setting this in Dublin, because let's say because the book isn't unraveling, let's say I wanted to write about something like a situation just like Syria. Well, first of all, the book would be about Syria. And it would lose its universal power, it would lose its mythic power. But also, to set the book in Dublin creates a simulation. Mm. And so it's my own belief that when we watch the news, we are being bombarded by the spectacle. And we've been living in a period of time where we have all grown up with the spectacle. I'm in my mid-40s now, and the spectacle has been just a part of my life every day. The TV's on in the background at dinner time, perhaps. You're eating your dinner.
Normalized?
Normalized. We are completely inured. Our self-defenses are up, but for good reason. Because if you truly felt what was occurring on the news, you might not be able to get out of bed in the morning. And so I realized that when I was writing this book, I thought fiction needs to be a bit more dangerous, needs to be a bit less bourgeois, needs to make the reader really feel something in a way that it actually might hurt them. Well, and so the book is a simulation in which a reader from Dublin suddenly might come to understand what it's like to live through an unraveling, what it's like to make the kind of decisions that Eilish makes. And the thing, I suppose, for me, questions are more important than answers in fiction. The framing of the questions is more important than having a solution as a novelist. But one of the questions that I was asking myself is, what does it take for somebody to get on one of those boats? What does it take for somebody who is an educated, middle-class person, for example, with children, who we go, oh, well, I wouldn't do that. That I would have got out long before then. I'd never, I wouldn't be reduced to that.
I'd have read the signs. I'd have fled.
I'd have read the signs, and that's a big part of the book as well, is the question, well, really, would you? Because, let's see why Eilish isn't leaving. And what sort of one of the things that I learned writing this book is about complexity. It's about what defines us as people and defines us as people in the places that we live. And we are parents, and we are siblings, we're spouses, we are looking after parents. We have a deep relationship with place. We have a deep relationship with our career. All of these things form the layers of identity. And for you to make that decision to leave a place, which is one of the most difficult decisions you can do in your life, to leave a home behind. What I learned writing this book is all of those things have to be unplugged one after another until there's nothing left. And then that's when you will take that boat.
And without, there is a gradual unplugging as the book goes on, and that unplugging happens with the journey from control to power to terror.
Yeah. There's terror in this book.
There is terror in this book,
yeah,
ladies and gentlemen.
I think that...
So please, I hope that's a nervous
You will have that 1,000-yard stare after reading Prophet's Song. I think that it's really important that if you're going to walk the reader into hell, or you're going to ask the reader to stare at the Medusa, then you have to come at it with some poetry and some grace. And Virgil was the guide for Dante. And so my writing has to have that same quality. It has to have beauty. It has to have the gift of holding the reader's hand. Because if you stare into the abyss, you can fall in too. And so the book is designed to take you there and allow you to see in, but to keep holding your hand and then walk you back out.
When you accepted the Booker Prize, the speech you gave afterwards was absolutely phenomenal. And if you haven't seen it, I'd ask you to all go onto YouTube and search Paul's speech accepting the Booker Prize. And I'm just going to quote something you said. Quoting from Gospels, you said, "If you use what is within you will save you. If you do not use what is within you will destroy you."
Yeah.
So the decision to use what was in you to write this novel. Let's just talk about that.
It's a quote from the Apocryphal Gospels, and I think it's one of the most profound pieces of wisdom that's ever been written. And I don't think it's that well known. And it points fundamentally to the question of authenticity. I had realized that through my 20s, I was not writing fiction. I was doing everything else. I was a musician. I was working for a newspaper since I started freelancing at 19 for a national newspaper, the Sunday Tribune. And I got sucked into that quite quickly. I didn't even complete my degree. I dropped out. And I had a lot of responsibility very early. But as my 20s progressed, as my responsibilities increased, and I had started becoming a critic, I was starting to get a little bit bitter, and I did not know why. And the bitterness was increasing. And the people around me in the newspaper were, "God, Lynch is getting a bit grumpy, isn't he? What's wrong with Lynch?" But the reality is I was shutting down the inner voice, the sage inside that was saying, "You need to write." I was completely shutting it down to the extent that it was destroying me. There was something inside me, and it was destroying me because I was not becoming my best version of myself. I was becoming the worst version of myself. So I had a moment where I was in a taxi on the island of Lipari in Sicily, going up a hill, and I just had this thunderbolt, and it was that inner wisdom that comes when you have time to listen. And the voice just told me, "You need to write fiction. You need to swerve." And I love that idea of swerving. There's that idea of what if when God threw Satan out of heaven, if Satan, as he fell towards hell, had swerved instead, right?
Landed here.
Well, who knows? And so I swerved. And the remarkable thing was that I'd never written fiction before then. I'd never written a thing of fiction. And yet I knew that I was meant to be a fiction writer. So how did I know that? And I have, I've been a serious meditator now since I started meditating seriously after that. And I've realized that there is this aspect of mind it's truly fascinating to me. There's many different names for it, many different religions, meditation traditions, artists, people who spend their time chasing or watching the subconscious have talked about this, and they give it different names, but there's an aspect of mind that is just higher than your ordinary day-to-day life. And that when you give it space, you encounter your authentic self, and you can hear yourself. You can hear who it is you truly are. And the problem is that as we live in a time now where we're so fragmented and we're so bombarded by the technology in our pocket and the sort of fractured modern world, that our ability to hear that self has been lost. And that's why I quoted that in the speech. There's a little flag I was flying.
So that led you to the first 4 wonderful novels on the right and on your left-hand side. The time it takes to write something like this.
Yeah.
and the emotional drain it takes to write something like Prophet Song.
But just under 4 years to write Prophet Song. And actually, you mentioned that I'd published 5 books in 10 years, which is technically true. And it's a kind of a weird quirk of, there's about 15 years writing in those 5 books. And, you know, I think the first book took me close to 4 years. The second one took me 2. The next one took me close to 4 years. The next one took me 2. And I'm hoping the next one after Prophet Song, which was close to 4 years, will take me 2. Because it's been a while since I've written anything, and I'm starting to worry if I'll ever write again. And I was actually, I just saw, before we came up, I saw, you know, great Olga Tokarczuk, the Nobel Prize winner, that she has a new book out. And she just won the Nobel, I think it was 3 years ago. I'm like, how did she do that? How did she get another? How did she manage to write a book? So
no, you will. It's going to be 2.
Yeah.
It's going
Next
to be 2.
one will be really short. I'll write it in 2 years.
It's going to be 2. There's several passages in the book that we'll refer to. You may read in a little while, but to move from this moment of control or the influence or increasing control to then this power. There's a point that you write when so Ailisham families are visited early on in the book, and then they come back kind of a third of the way through, and there's 2 uniformed Garda in the kitchen, I think, and you write that it's the uniform that speaks about the power, not them, and there's this moment where it's the next bit of moments where the relationship is changing, and there's this escalation of concern or fear or what next.
Yeah. I'm interested in power, but I'm interested in putting narrative shape on something that we can't actually see. And that narrative shape is the way that the characters in all my novels come up against something that's so much greater than they can measure. It's the event that they're inside and their own will to power against the event. And I'm interested in this for a number of reasons. I think that when we look at our own lives, we have this dilemma all the time, which is that we try to give meaning to our lives. We try to define who we are and live the beautiful life, but at the same time, we're caught up within these enormous structures that we can't truly measure. And we're impacted enormously by these structures to the degree that we really have so little agency. And so we're always this sort of this silent, inalienable universe that's around us. And here we are, these little tiny creatures trying to give ourselves meaning. And these 2 things this just doesn't give a damn, it's silent. And I'm always trying to map that, to actually give narrative form to something that's unmappable. And at the same time, I'm interested in blindness, in human blindness, in the way that we try to navigate the labyrinth that we're in our lives, the way that characters in my books make choices that they feel certain about, but the outcome that comes is they reap the crop of the unforeseen. And that is how life is. We all live in certainty. We listen to the news, and there's non-stop future casting going on, and we know nothing. Nothing at all.
There's this gradual descent into the darkness, and there's this illusion of control, or there's the agency that she may feel that she's got, and the actions that she takes is trying to force normalcy or control, as it continues, the pace of writing and the intensity, and we should talk about the writing style, because it doesn't give her that time or space. She thinks that she's got it, but increasingly time is running away from her. And so talk about the writing style for us. And it's unusual for someone who hasn't read that way.
I mean, when you write a book, when you sit down to write a book, one of the things that you're looking first on that first page, or the first few pages, is the form. The form is the way the language is held together. It's the choices that you make about the length of your sentences. It's the choices you make of the perspective and the language, and all of these little small choices that form a mesh. And that mesh is what points to the meaning of the book. And so as I started writing the book, I would put some paragraph marks in, and the book would just say no. it felt wrong. So I deleted the paragraph marks and and suddenly the book was being written in this block of text. And I thought, what's going on here? I was thinking about it. And I realized that what the book was telling me was that it wanted to reflect the reality of what was going on. And the reality in the book is that Eilish is imprisoned in her situation. She's imprisoned in just the sort of runaway sense of events, of the inevitability of what's going on. Because after a certain period of time, you start to feel this is inevitable. It has its own momentum, that the book is demonstrating something, that there is a tipping point, and once you get to it, you can't stop it. You cannot stop it. And the book will take you to that outcome. And so the book asked for long sentences as well. And the long sentences are doing two things too. One is they're capturing the feeling of now, that nowness that you're in, that feeling of the moment just unfolding as Eilish is shouting at the kids and trying to get people to school and doing all of the things that we all do in our daily lives. And I let the daily life in, my trips to the supermarkets, like, get this into the book, all of this stuff. And so you've got these long sentences that just immerse the reader in the feeling of now. But at the same time, those long sentences are capturing the sense of inevitability, that what's occurring cannot be stopped.
You have, we've already revealed, but it's very early on, that Larry disappeared. We won't go into the details of what happens, but she has 4 children, including a really young child, that they're also important in holding the book together and trying to avoid the inevitability.
Yeah.
There are some scenes and passages that you've written as we get towards terror here, and they're very hard to read as it relates to human beings, human condition, but it's incredibly relatable because it's a family, it's a child, there's a father.
Yeah, it's hugely important to write a family into this and to be really truthful about what a family is. And Eilish is at that point where she's at peak complexity, shall we say. She's in her 40s and she's got a father who's sliding into dementia. And we should talk about him because I think he's interesting. But she's got 3 teenagers and she has a surprise infant and an unexpected child. And she's also peak career herself. So she's caught in that squeeze that many people in their 30s and 40s find themselves in. And so that in itself is hugely complex. And I'm mapping all of that too at the same time, that she's within all of these dynamics, trying to deal with her children, who are also then responding in very individual ways to the disappearance of the father. So Mark just goes into this kind of silent self. And he starts to withdraw, and then he makes choices because he's becoming radicalized.
So Mark's the eldest.
Mark's the eldest. So the events start to radicalize him, inevitably. And then there's Molly, who's next, and Molly just starts to become depressed and stops eating. And she was an outward child who played hockey, was on top of the league, and she just stops playing sport, and she starts to deteriorate. And then there's Bailey, who's her 12-year-old son. And Bailey, she chooses not to tell initially what's truly happened to their dad. And that proves to be an undoing of sorts, because the telling of the lie disrupts his sense of truth with her. She's trying to protect him, but she ends up damaging his relationship with her because he no longer trusts her. And so that act of telling him a lie sends him down his dark road. And so they have this really troubling dynamic. And then there's the father.
Who lives across town and is at the one minute a sage man who's seen history and proffers sound advice. And then he'll deteriorate, as you say, into dementia. So there's that line between what is is he lucid or not? And
Yeah.
there's a wonderful passage. I'll read it because you're going to read a long one.
You're going to read it well now. I hope.
I'm going to read it well now.
Yeah,
Because
good.
you'll read it longer, better next.
Yeah,
Do you want to read it?
No, I don't know what it is. My God.
I'll read it. She's watching her father's mind, seeing at work the neurological weather, a zone of low pressure giving to sudden inclemency. In 5 minutes' time, there'll be sunshine. So it's that mind fading in the night.
Simon is constantly kind of unmappable. You don't know where he's going to be. And Simon, like her, took the degree, and he has a conversation early on in the book where he has these moments of incredible lucidity. He understands precisely what's going on, and then other times he mistakes Molly in the garden and he thinks Molly is Ailish. But he has this conversation with her, and he says, we both took the degree. We understand what the real is as scientists. We know how to measure what is real. But the people who are in power now, what they're doing is they're muddying the real. And you do this by taking control of the institutions. And once you take control of the institutions, you take control of the narratives. And once you take control of the narrative, you muddy the sense of truth. And he says, that's what they're doing. And so he has these moments, and he says to her, and at another point, he says, you need to get out. You need to leave. And they have a sister in Canada, Anya, and Ailish has this difficult relationship with her, and they talk on the phone, and Anya says to her at one point, history is a silent record of those who did not know when to leave. And Ailish says, well, that's very well for you to say. You're in Canada. I'm here dealing with the fact that my husband is gone. I'm here dealing with the kids. I'm dealing with, Molly, who's supposed to be playing in the hockey league. I'm dealing with Dad. What if he falls and breaks a hip? What then? And so the complexity is there. The complexity is locking her into her life. And I just want to mention about the kids that their trajectories is actually also a way of mapping their traumas and how trauma affects people individually, how trauma each sort of imprints these children, because they are children. And there's a moment later when, at peak unraveling, shall we say, where the country has descended into civil war, and Ailish is they're in the house, and there's a bombardment, and she has the child, the infant, in her arms, and the child is teething, and she has no paracetamol for the child, or Calpol, what we use in Ireland, and she understands that her fear is transmitting into the child, and that the child will carry this fear inside him unknowingly for the rest of his life. He will carry this inside him, and it will erupt later in his life. And he will never know what it is, how he is carrying her anxiety, he is carrying her trauma, and that it will be inside his body, and it will carry into his future. And he will never understand what it is.
The effect on children is really difficult to read in the book, but it's so important, and that's why I'll be talking at the end about all of you having to buy it again and read it. As you step back out and you think about the nature of other images we see on television, we see people having to leave their countries and cross borders. I'm assuming there's a certain I have an image of what this family looks like. It looks like a very normal family that maybe in the West or in Europe we used to see, and it's almost like you can't imagine that this would be happening. Was that conscious in your mind to think about the ethnicity or the geography, the affluence that they have, because they're a wealthy family, right? They have means.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, as a writer, all writers are trying to get past othering, aren't we? We're trying to get past the sense of us and them or the other. Fiction has that ability to, as I said, simulate reality. It has that ability to take the reader into another world where you can read somebody from another culture and you encounter a person who's exactly like you. Mm-hmm. That's the beauty of fiction, and differences fall away. And there's nothing new about saying that. But one of the things that I'm doing in this book, as I said, is by creating this simulation, I'm I'm sort of tricking the reader, because at some point they go, oh, I see what's happening here. And now I'm seeing what's happening here and understanding what's happening here in a way that I didn't understand before. And I know that this is true because I actually get a lot of emails about this from people readers, and they email me and they say, I have a new sense of the news. I have a new sense of the world. I have a new sense of something that I didn't know before, and that your book showed me that. And I mean, the beauty of fiction and reading in general is that it has that ability. Great writers throughout the ages have always taken our hand and they walk us to the top of a mountain for that unbelievable view. Or they build a house of cards, one complex idea after another, until suddenly you're on this very delicate thing, but you see the house of cards. But to go back to the idea of the fractured times that we live in, you know, my anxiety as a writer is that because we're so fractured, it's very difficult to hold with clarity the ideas that we're trying to build in our minds, that the writer's building in our minds for us, and so that when we're reading in a distracted fashion, we're losing the complexity. There are things that we're dropping silently, and we don't notice that they're dropping away. And we come back to the book after maybe we were reading 5 books at once, because, you know, that's very common, and you're coming back to the book, and you're like, okay, where was I again? But all the subtle complexities are erased. They're gone.
Well, I can assure you, you don't go away from the book and not know where you are. You always know where you are in this novel. But talking of those reactions that you've had in this simulation, those reactions would tell you that this simulation is closer to what people perceive as being where we are or getting to in reality today than a simulation. So
yeah, I mean, it's funny that people think, some people were saying about the book, oh, it's a warning. He's written a warning. It's a prophecy of the world that's to come. And then, of course, when there was the riots in Dublin and the far right revealed itself to be actually there, everybody's like, oh, he's completely right. He is a prophet after all. And I mean, I just found that slightly amusing because the book wasn't written as a warning. But at the same time, it is asking the questions about where are we going in the West? Because if you start at the starting point of this book and you just take a few steps back and think about what does it take from where we are now to get to the opening chapter of Prophet Song, that's the question that maybe I'm asking as well, is for the reader to think for that. What's required? What steps are required to get us to that point? And the scary thing is that not many steps are required. You know, it's not
institutions, the rule of law.
It's not some unfathomable leap. You know, it's actually within sight now within many countries that we had sort of had believed in as to be sort of benchmarks of liberal democracy, and so. Yeah, while at the same time, the book is holding up a mirror to events around the world. And there was a quote that I wanted to use when I was as an epigraph that was really important to the meaning of this book. And is a line from Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing, which I notebooked about 15 years ago, and we couldn't get permission because unfortunately he was very sick and he subsequently died, and we couldn't get the permission in time for publication. But it was the quote is something like this. He says, "The task of the narrator appears to be an easy one. He seems to be required to choose his tale from among the many that are available. But of course that is not the case. The task is rather to make many of the one." And I love that idea. That's why myths retain their power. They make many of the one. If you can come up with a story that's a vessel, that's a container for all different realities, all universal realities, then that story will have more power. And one of the interesting things that I discovered after writing this book was that Ukraine happened, Gaza happened, and I've met people from Ukraine and Gaza who've said to me, "You've told our story." And that seems incredible to me, because there I am, a guy in Dublin, I mean, leafy green Ireland, and I'm sitting in my room writing this book, and somehow this tale that I create anticipates, includes, contains what's going on in the world right now. And that's a kind of I see that as kind of miraculous, as a sort of something that's unplanned. But yeah.
We're going to ask you to continue on that theme and,
do a read. Yeah, I'll just...
much better than I did.
Well, we'll see. We can be the judge, right?
And this is a section where...
we're in the unraveling.
We're in the unraveling, and the news...
Eilish is they're kind of holed up in their house. The electricity begins to stutter, and then an outage dissolves in an instant, the constant of electrical hum to an elemental quiet, the piercing and steady eruptions of war entering freely into thought. She tells herself it is the sound of pebbles rolling on a tin roof, the sound of a nail being hammered home, the exhaust of an old car giving out, the house alarms in the area ringing until one by one they fall silent. Bailey goes upstairs and sits with Molly on her bed watching a movie on a laptop with a pair of earbuds shared between them while Eilish tries to read a novel downstairs. A sudden noise outside sends her upstairs holding the book in her hand. She is standing in the bathroom and flushes the toilet without having used it. She cannot remember where she placed the book. In the afternoon, she sits by the bedroom window waiting for a detailed report on the BBC while Ben naps in the cot. The news comes on and she turns it off, shaking with rage, thinking, this is not the news. This is not the news at all. The news is a civilian watching the soldier outside her home as he lolls on a sandbag playing with his phone. The news is the assault rifle resting against the sandbag. It is the soldier's laughing mouth. It is the fast food wrappers and coffee cups strewn about the asphalt. It is the retired couple from up the street who have decided that they want to go. The news is their quarrel in the driveway. It is the woman flapping her hands but what cannot be taken in the car. It is the husband who shuts his face to his wife. It is the black bag the woman holds in her arms like a child. It is what is inside the bag. The news is the entire contents of the car. It is the boot. The man has to sit closed. The news is the driveway gated for the last time. The house dark at night. It is the traffic light stuck on red for a week before it goes dark. It is the car that will not be allowed through the checkpoint. The news is the shrinking air on the streets. It is the shuttered shops, the windows plyboarded. It is the horse dogs woofing throughout the night. It is the eldest son who does not call anymore because it's too risky to call and nobody knows if he is dead or alive. She watches an army officer riding down the street on a nodding black horse, the build of the thing. She thinks it is a Frisian sport horse, the rider's hands quiet on his lap, his dark boots gleaming to the knee. How he moves within some serene and regal bearing, as though he were but an emissary of the law of force. The soldiers at the checkpoint come to standing, and the officer does not dismount, but waves his crop as though casting incantations into the air. She watches the horse rotate an ear without turning its head. It is listening, it seems, to something beyond the uneasy stillness, the whisperings of a tall conifer, the radiation from the sun upon its leaves. It can hear the death that awaits with open arms all over the city, the death that waits to be let drop from the sky.
In a minute, I'm going to ask our team and colleagues in the room to go with microphones, so get prepared with your hands up. We have to, at some point, pause because we have too many people in the audience that haven't read the book. And the terror that then ensues afterwards is, we need to save that till after 8 o'clock in the evening. We can't go there now.
I couldn't go there actually for a while.
You couldn't?
I couldn't go there for about 3 months. I was completely blocked. It was during lockdown. Could not leave the house, or well, you could leave the house, but you couldn't travel very far. And I couldn't write chapter 8. And I knew that something enormous was required of me. And I knew that I was going to ask something enormous of the reader. And it goes back to the idea of a touch of grace and a touch of poetry, but I did not know how to write the thing that needed to be done and how to shape it. And so I was blocked for about 3 months, and I was going crazy, and I was going on long walks, and I was arguing with myself, and I was trying to rationalize it. And of course, rationalizing is not where the magic comes from. And so I asked my subconscious. I said, show me. And I had a dream, and it showed me. It showed me how to do it. And I woke up, and I went, oh my word. And I wrote it down, and it mapped for me how to do it. And it was completely correct. And I jumped in the car soon after, drove. I broke lockdown. I broke the curfew. I broke the garbage. And I drove to Roscommon, up the country to a house I borrowed, where I had 6 days to myself. And I'm normally a very slow writer. I'm a couple of 200 words a day kind of person. And I wrote like 9,000 words in 5 days, and it just came out as it meant to be. And
because do you think you'd held it in the
yeah, I was quietly working on it without knowing I was working on it. But once I knew how to do it, the damn thing had its own momentum, and the reader will feel that too. It pulls you all the way down.
It really does, and we're so glad that you found it in you and wrote. It was just such a phenomenal book. Right, we're going to go to some questions, and I'd like
no statements.
No statements. So there's a few rules. No statements. No, we really like you, and a quick question because we want to get as many out as possible. And as Kate Adie said, it's like a lollipop. This gentleman first here, like a lollipop, nice and close, and then we'll come back to this lady on the right over here.
Good evening, Paul Lynch. Thank you so much for coming here.
My pleasure.
The books and the movies that stand out most to me are the ones that I rewatch or I reread again and again and again, almost as though if it's a book, I want to write it line by line just to be able to feel the language. I'd like to ask you as a former critic, well, you can't be a former critic, you'll always be a critic, a film critic as well as a writer. What is a certain movie or a certain book that you felt like you almost wanted to take it within yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that as I've gotten older and more serious about literature and cinema too, that rereading is more important than reading. And you know, I teach at Maynooth University, and I always say to my students, there's a reason why the classics endure. There's a reason why, even though the canon changes form and shape all the time, and there's arguments about it, in truth, the canon is shaped by writers who are talking to these writers in the past. Fiction is very often a conversation in the way that you can hear Conrad in Faulkner, and you can hear Shakespeare in Melville, and you can hear Emerson in Woolf, and so on and so forth. And sometimes the conversations actually move through the generations between the writers. And I have found that Faulkner's As I Lay Dying is a book that no matter how many times I read it, it's so capacious. I think that's his master statement, that there's something fundamental about what he shapes. There's a house on a hill, there's a storm, there's a mother dying in her bed, and there's a family arguing about what to do. And it's just full of every extraordinary emotion. You know, anger and stupidity and faith and the whole gamut. And it's Faulkner's master statement. And the book it's told through these individual voices. But everyone is a discrete universe. Every single one of them is completely locked into their own way of seeing. So they misread everybody all the time. Everybody's constantly being misread and misunderstood, because that's how life is. And that book for me is one of the supreme novels. And I think I honestly believe that that Faulkner is operating at the level of Shakespeare in that book. And I love cinema too, and there's so many extraordinary films. But there's one film that I've rewatched a lot, a film made only recently, and I included, I was asked by Sight and Sound to contribute to their best films of the decade, Paul, and I had a lot of, Tokyo Story by Ozu, and Mizoguchi, and Robert Bresson, people like that. But The White Ribbon by Michael Haneke, I think is a film for the ages.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Lady here, then the gentleman over here.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
I've started reading the book, haven't finished it yet. It is part of our book club read this month. So when I started reading the book, as a mother myself with 3 kids of similar ages as your characters, it was almost like a nightmare that one always has, getting the knock at the door at night. You did explain a bit earlier about why you wrote a block of text, but that didn't really bother me that much because I was reading it on the Kindle. But what really bothered me was the lack of quotation marks on the dialogue, because one needs to keep going back to figure out who said what, and it's kind of disturbing. So I don't know if you did that part intentionally, or did you think that would make the reader feel a little bit disoriented and disturbed? So I just wanted to understand why you did that bit.
I've never written with quotation marks, ever. And there are many writers who don't do it either, and there's a good reason for it. There's nothing that produces lazy writing quicker than a quotation mark. You put a quotation mark and you slop down anything. Whereas if you shape dialogue very precisely, it should sound like the character. You should be able to hear them. And so I've never used them. I never will use them. I think they're ugly, and I don't have any problem understanding who because I don't believe that it's written in a tricky way at all. I think part of the task of being a novelist is actually to articulate very precisely who the characters are and what they're doing, and I would happily say you're in a minority there, but I'm very sorry, and I can't do anything about it. I'm just really stubborn and difficult, and I'm not going to change.
We're coming to the gentleman here.
Thank you. I wanted to ask more about the prose and the block of text, which I loved because it added to the claustrophobia. But you mentioned the Iliad. Did the way the Iliad the way that was written, did that inspire in any way the block of text and the style of the prose to get to that inverse of the Iliad that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think incantation is really important. That sense of almost that there is a narrator incantating something to you, that you're being held under a spell. And it's, modern novel isn't oral, but I think that modern fiction should contain echoes of all storytelling that's come before. It should contain the mythic in it. It should contain echoes of the oral. It should contain echoes of Elizabethan. It should contain echoes of Victorian literature. All the different modernism, postmodernism, it should all somehow be there as a background, as a silent background in the text. And I like prose, to write prose that is that has that incantatory effect on the reader, that has the sense of hypnosis, that the rhythms are pulling you in. And Virginia Woolf once said that style is rhythm. It's just what it is. Style is just rhythm. And the rhythm is really important because the rhythm is the heartbeat of the book, but it's also the seduction, and it's also the way of pulling you along. And also rhythm is also a way of conveying meaning, because the rhythms change, the rhythms convey the feeling of the events. And so, if you think to a writer like Flaubert and the modern realism that he created, which is often told, fiction traditionally in the last 150 years is third person past tense, for example, or it's always the past tense. And that's a way of writing it describes emotions, but it doesn't make you feel the emotions. You know what I mean? It's a way of objectively describing the real in Flaubert. Well, my writing is mimetic. I wanted the sentences to press into reality. I want them to press into the emotions. I want them to map all the contours of life that go unseen, to shape around things. And so in that mimetic feeling of the sentences, it's my way of making you feel what's going on. It's my way of deepening the real and creating a more immersive sense of what life is. So that's all the things that are going on in my sentences, kind of.
We have one gentleman at the back, and then we'll come to the gentleman at the front.
Hi, Paul. Your next question for me was actually about the next book that is coming up. You said hopefully 2 years down the line. Are you thinking, now that you won the Booker Prize, is there pressure to come up with something that matches it?
Thanks for that question. I mean, God. There's certainly, I mean, earlier in my career, nobody gave a damn what I was putting out next. Even my editors were like, oh God, what's he going to do now? And obviously there's going to be a lot of anticipation about what I do next, and there will be an audience, and you know, the next book that I write will get reviewed by everybody on the same day. But honestly, I genuinely think that the part of me from which the writing comes from doesn't give a damn. And every book that I've written has always just done what it wanted to do. Because when I write, I have a very deep sense of truth, and that the fiction that I'm creating must follow the truth that's been asked of me in the book. For example, when I was writing Prophet Song, I often had ideas that were more novelistic or more romantically inclined. Maybe I'll make her do this. Maybe I'll make her more of a heroine. Maybe she can go this way. And the book just kept saying no, 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 because there's a line of truth. And that is what I hope will allow me to continue being an authentic writer, that will allow me to continue using what is within me and not paying any attention to what's outside me. And my only concern now is, of course, is when you win the Booker, they do tell you you won't write for another year because you become this guy on the stage. And it's, in some ways, it is a pleasure to meet readers, and it is a pleasure to go on the road and to talk about your book. It's an honor, in fact, frankly, and I'm very happy to do it. But I do, as time will go on, I will start to feel divorced from that higher mind, that best part of myself. And I was talking to Damon Galgut the other day, and he won the Booker, I think it was 3 years ago, and he looks really fed up. He's just kind of fed up, and he just wants to get back to writing, and because ultimately we're writers, we're not performers. I write because I started writing because I couldn't speak. So that's. Now I can, it seems.
Have the microphone to this lady here, and then this gentleman first.
Thank you, Paul. Really fantastic. I'm here.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry, this lady. Yeah.
No, I'm only at page 48 so far, but
no spoilers.
I'm enjoying it.
I know you're not like
you haven't spoiled it at all. But I'm just wondering, especially having won the Booker Prize, and if, and I guess when, they're going to come to you and say, hey, we've got to make a movie of this book. Will you allow it? And especially considering what's happening today, for example, in Stormont with the re-establishment of the Assembly and the Nationalists coming in as First Minister, will you insist, if you do make a movie of it, will you insist that it's based in Dublin?
It has to be based in Dublin. There's no other way to make it. And nobody knows for certain whether films get made or TV series. The fact of the matter is that for any book to be made into a film, it takes a kind of miracle. It takes an enormous alignment of people and financing, but it's definitely much easier after you've won the Booker Prize. So I don't know, but it's possible. Yeah.
Lady at the front.
Hi, Paul. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for writing this book. I wasn't intending to ask a question, but there is something that was burning in my head all through this book, and it's how did you have such an insight to speak the voice of a mother and the terror and torture that is a mother's love in certain circumstances? And I just couldn't believe how you, as a man, I know you're a dad, but how did you see it from the mother's perspective so well?
In some ways, I find that question difficult to answer because I consider it my job to do that. That's why I'm doing this. It's because, you know, if a painter uses all the colors, the painter is able to paint with greens and blues, and they're able to create a sense of reality from that. It's, as a writer, I think that you should be able to imagine your way into anybody, or create anyone. And there's probably mystery there, you know, but I've always paid attention to people in my life, and I've always paid attention to the women in my life, you know, and my mother, you know, is somebody who I've paid attention to, and all of that works its way in, and you know, what happens betwixt the pen and the page is a mystery as well. You don't truly know, and you can't rationalize it. It's just what I do.
I'm going to push for an extra 2 minutes and get in a lot of trouble for doing so. So final questions from people. We have a lady at the front here, and then we'll go to the lady behind.
It's like an auction.
It is.
I won't say I enjoyed reading the book, but...
oh, there's the door.
No, and I think we choose the words, you know, our emotion when we read, and enjoyment probably wasn't this one. But, you know, I got through it, and I'm very, very happy I read it. But
I actually met a woman in the farmer's market that I shop at, and she stopped me and she said, "Your book's very dark."
And that's
and
okay.
I said, okay. I said,
Good.
but is it true?
No, and that's very good. But just, is this story finished?
Well, for anybody who's finished the book, they know that it ends with a question, essentially. And I think the questions are more important. And so the book is... I can't talk about the ending, but it's a question, and the reader will finish the book.
Final question from this lady on the second row, sorry.
Thanks. It's been absolutely wonderful to listen to you and about the writing craft. Do you read? Who are the contemporary readers you're rating right now?
There's a Mexican writer published by Fitzcarraldo called Fernanda Melchor, and she's a book called Hurricane Season, and I love that book. I love it so much that I talk about it all the time. I love it so much that I wrote her a fan letter. I actually wrote her a fan letter. I emailed her publisher and said, can you give me her email address, please? And I wrote her a fan letter. And I think that she's doing something really unique. I think that she's taken the Southern Gothic fiction of Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor and Cormac McCarthy, and she's brought it south into Mexico, into the modern abyss that is Mexico. And she's used those writers in conversation to create something that's completely uniquely her own. And she goes to the darkest places of the psyche. She's able to do things that are just really extraordinary, that require an extraordinary level of genius, of talent. And I think she's the real deal. I think that if she keeps going like this, you know, we'll be talking about her in 50 years' time. And I'll just say finally, Jan Fosse, or John Foes as I was calling him for a long time, he won the Nobel last year, and I thought that was totally warranted. I think he's marvelous. I think he's doing something really, really unique.
Paul, to close us out, I'm going to quote again from Paul's Booker acceptance speech, which I'm going to ask you again. Look it up and watch it. Paul said, "This was not an easy book to write, but I had to write the book anyway. We do not have a choice in such matters." And I'm emotional about it because, you know, you didn't feel like you had a choice.
No.
An audience, you have a choice. You don't have to read it, and you don't have to buy it. But I'm going to ask that you do, because I think it's a really important book. And once you've bought it and you've read it, please talk to somebody about it. Books will be available outside. Paulie's going to be signing outside for the next hour, half an hour, 45 minutes, 3 hours, we don't know.
I'll sign them all.
Well, he'll sign them all. All that remains for me to do is say several thank yous. A huge thank you to all of you for coming out and closing out this Saturday night with us here at the festival. Thank you to all of the team in the room, the AV staff. the translators. Thanks to our title sponsor, Emirates Airline. Thank you to our day sponsor, Dubai Duty Free. Our founding partner, Dubai Culture, the parent organisation, which is the Emirates Literature Foundation. And of course, we have to say a huge thank you. Please give a massive round of applause to Paul Lynch.